right, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Enough to Keep Going podcast. This is early on the first week of February, and I'm jumping the gun here because I am so excited to talk about what we are discussing tonight. This is our Games in the Decade review. This is our Decade in Review show. We've got four to the floor here. We've got all four gentlemen of the E2KG network joining us tonight to talk about the last decade in games. So before we kind of dive into what we're going to talk about and kind of lay out the structure to it, I want to go around the horn here and introduce us all. It is wonderful to have everybody here on the mics tonight. First, I want to go with the man who is making a statement with his Twitch gaming shirt, but his Overwatch hat, as Blizzard Activision just announced that they're moving last week to YouTube gaming. Here is Agasically Stamus holding out some hope with his mixed streaming rivalries. How are you, sir?
I'm Agasically Stamus. I'm on the boards, and sometimes I engineer stuff.
Sometimes that is correct, and we are glad to have you wearing the bright white T-shirt against the moody, shadowy background. The bearded one himself, Swissguard. Swissguard, how are you?
I'm all right. This show has been a long time coming, so glad we're finally able to coordinate and get on with it.
Yes, it has. Not only a decade in review, but months in preparation, or at least hype, as we've tried to schedule this multiple times. But you know what? We are gamers with lives and families, and we are glad that we can make time when we can, and we understand when we can't.
Grown-ups who
Speaking
game.
of-
Grown-ups who game.
That's right.
Stay on brand.
Sorry. Oh, excuse me. Speaking of grown-ups who game, with his Disney Infinity, one of the trends of the decade back behind him with the rise and fall of toys to life, it is Osiris Prime. How are you, sir?
I am super tired tonight, so I might go babbling a lot tonight.
Well, then it will feel just like any other night here on the E2KG network. If you're not babbling and I'm not rambling, we've got a soapbox for Agasicles to stand on, so we'll be just fine.
Yeah,
Anyhow.
I'll have to share stories with you guys on the multiple episodes of the podcast that there are times when I blank out and like I don't know what I just said, and then I wake up and the podcast is still going.
Well, most of the time you kind of make sense. I think that is the reality of grown-ups who game, is that we are grown-ups with lives, and sometimes things are busy. But it's been a busy decade as well, gentlemen. It has been a very busy decade for games. We've got a lot of things to talk about tonight. So we're going to break this down relatively quickly, and we're going to first talk about trends of the decade. We're going to talk about gaming trends of the decade, whether it's the industry or fandom, or games as a hobby and lifestyle, or games themselves. We're going to talk about a variety of trends here. We each picked out three trends. There's some overlap between us, as there often tends to be, and so we'll kind of bleed into some of those our individual picks. And then after we talk about gaming trends, we've each chosen two influential games of the decade. So the end of December, beginning of January, lots of sites had their most influential games of the last decade. We're not necessarily saying these are the most influential. We're just going to say these are influential games. And we've all got some reasons for them. And so we're going to be talking about that tonight. And then finally, in true 2KG fashion, we're going to wrap up with our most important or enjoyed game of the last decade. So this is our personal choice, just like our gaming superlatives. We're not always talking about the best, most impactful. We're talking about the one that has made the most lasting impact with us as individuals. So, with all that said and done, let's dive right into some trends of the decade. And as we are recording on Discord, although we started, oh wow, I was gonna go all the way back to our CAG days in terms of the variety of services that we have recorded on. But being on YouTube, getting kicked off of YouTube, and now over to Discord, a first trend here, Swiss, is yours. The rise of streamers, content creators, and general the influencers of the new gaming medium.
Actually, that's Prime's story.
Yeah, that's mine.
Oh, so
We're off to
Prime,
a
you're not the only one who's tired. Look at that.
awesome
That's all right.
start.
It's the
I'm
beards.
just-
We
Yeah.
get confused, and the glasses. No, that's all right. So yeah, this one was kind of, I guess, kind of dear to my heart since I've been streaming a lot lately myself, a lot more than I used to. It was kind of off and on before, but and this kind of ties back into I guess Clee's Twitch shirt because the streaming for me at least, when I kind of found out about it and started sort of watching it, I still don't really watch it all that much, but was back on Justin.tv, kind of the parent from Twitch, where Twitch kind of spawned from. They split off actually, and eventually Justin just kind of went away. And now Twitch is kind of becoming this that Justin TV because they kind of do a little bit of everything now. But not only do you have the streaming on YouTube and Twitch and Mixer, and I'm sure there's a Facebook. There's many, and even Discord, I believe you can stream on too now. But you have just people making just kind of content like kind of like what I do is when I stream. Usually it's like super late at night, so there's not a lot of people that jump on my streams. So I'll just kind of pick that up and and dump it into another service like YouTube or something. And I used to do that. I do that on Mixer, and I do that with everything else that I used to record. So you got these other content creators out there. Excuse me. And then of course you got these influencers. You got people like Ninja and Shroud and all these other kind of big names that have like ballooned up now that have come out of these services that are I don't want to say start. Well, I guess starting now, really more. I think more so. You're kind of getting that shift to these guys and women have millions of viewers. So when they play a game, people are going to flock to that game usually. So I mean, we had the big thing with Ninja recently with moving from Twitch to Mixer for supposedly millions of dollars. I mean, we don't know if that number was totally correct. I don't know if Microsoft or Mixer ever actually said that was a correct number, the amount they threw out there. But and we have all these other people starting to switch from YouTube and Twitch, going to Mixer, going to Facebook, going out to all these different services. So I think this is going to be a big deal, and obviously it is now a big deal going forward. You got this new generation of kids and young adults. I don't think the four of us really watch people game too much, as far as I know. I know we create content, but we don't really watch it all that much. But you got a lot of people out there on YouTube and Twitch, especially. I think Mixer's starting to trying to catch up to everything else, and even Facebook now, and trying to get all this, the attention of all these people, but I just thought that was one of the really big things that happened over the last decade, or not even decade. It's really the last few years, 5 years, maybe even, or less, where this, where all these this kind of content and streaming is kind of coming from.
Yeah, I think that is I'll jump into my point here with it kind of ties into that over the course of this last decade, not only what you laid out, but at the beginning of the decade in 2011, obviously YouTube existed at that point, and we have the 2009, 2010, the start of Minecraft and all the streaming that kind of grew up around Minecraft and the communities there. And so my topic here for one of the trends is the fracturing of those game communities, and or maybe just the visibility of that fracturing, that that game communities always existed in forums, and but at the same time in the 2000s we still had kind of a lot of centralized games media. We had a lot of because of Xbox Live and 360, there was a good hub in terms of a communities place. Uh, but at the same time, as the decade changed and as kind of um, what was previously traditional games journalism and games media splintered off, and the rise of the streaming and influencers, as you talk about, it also allowed game communities to kind of fracture in a more visible way, that people could follow some of those content creators that you were talking about and just kind of funnel in to one of those channels, because that there was this demand, and there still is this demand for the frantic pace of content creation in order to keep people engaged in your channel for revenue. And so rather than kind of sampling a whole wide variety of game genres, that people focused in more on individual games, on individual styles and genres, or games that they would spend a lot more time with. And we'll come back around to that topic in some other ways later. But I think the fracturing and the kind of visible fracturing of that, it was definitely a trend and has continued. One of the other kind of byproducts of that over the course of this decade has been kind of the transparency of some of the toxicity that has always potentially been there, or anytime you have human communities gathering together, they do not always share the same like-minded perspectives. And so you get things like Gamersgate, and because of the ability to create content or to connect uh, within social media, that it becomes a lot more, that feedback or that toxicity also becomes a lot more immediate and transparent as well. So that's where I see a trend over the last decade. Hopefully we've kind of ebbed and flowed in that a little bit, but we will see it. And I think one of uh, the the connected pieces here is that as these game communities have fractured, as game genres have developed into their own industries and kind of compartmentalized, we've also seen a rise of kind of some background players, funders, supporters in terms of companies, and that Agasicles is one of your trends of the decade.
Before Gascles jumps in, can I add one thing to?
Please do, yeah.
So, kind of both you and Prime, I think I really liked how when you put that in the agenda, the fracturing of the game communities. I thought that was a good point. And you talked about as the industry has grown and compartmentalized. The first thing I thought when you said that was, ironically, given it also amplified the toxicity, but the maturation of the video game industry, in that it's not just there's this gamers and that's their entertainment anymore. I mean, to me, it's like, we're starting to see it exceed almost, Hollywood.
Well, it has exceeded Hollywood in terms of industry.
And so we're not thinking in terms of that's just what gamers do. Like you said, we have genres. And I think that for us, like, we're very much the equivalent of the film buff, but in video game terms. But seeing, like, there are certain types of gamers, I think actually the positive look at that is that the industry has grown to an extent that we can support multiple styles of gaming.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have, tying in with what Prime said with the influencers, you have Hollywood people pitching products all the time. It's like we've developed an industry for game pitching just by playing. So, like, that I feel like pulls into it. And then I like that you link this up right up to Agasicles. It's like, if the industry has grown to this extent, there's going to be, like you said, people behind the scenes that maybe aren't involved directly with the art, but are involved profusely with the art production, so to speak.
Yeah, and let me jump in and ask a question there too, before I proceed on to kind of brief my point. So, I guess the question I have for Prime and DBQ on your topics is, and maybe this is showing some of our maturation and growing up covering the games industry. I mean, so there's social media, and then there's the industry. And there's entertainment around the industry, right? There's what Keeley does, and and that kind of stuff. Do you guys, like? I wonder if these things are having. I feel like I'm starting to question as we turn the corner to exit the decade. There was a peak, maybe, where there was a point where these things were relevant to the industry, like how gamers behaved and how the communities acted and streamers. I kind of feel like that peak is past. Like going into this next decade, I feel like there was the whole thing about, like, the comment that Dr. Lupo made about how we have the ability to to influence people and like what games they play, and I'm like, no, you don't. Like you don't. And so I question whether or not these things. Do you feel like these two items reached their peak during the decade and are on the decline, or do you think, or how do you see them as? How do you think they ended the decade as the trend that you identified?
For me, I think it's really, I think it's more on. I don't think that they have passed their peak yet, to be honest with you, as far as streamers. And Dr. Lupo, I guess that comment is sort of correct. I guess. I mean, I don't think he can actually. I mean, obviously, he can't like make you. Hey, I'm playing, Apex or whatever he plays. I don't know what he plays because I don't watch him. I'm playing Apex, so everyone's got to play Apex. No, I mean, maybe his audience might, kind of do that, and maybe they'll, oh, okay, he's playing, Apex. I'm gonna go try it, and then, they might try it and be like, okay, it's all right, or hey, I like it, all right. But it's always going to come down. It's going to come down to that person's, preference of gaming. I mean, I like, I try my best to branch out and play other kind of genres. But I mean, if I find something I just can't play, like racing games. I just can't stand sim racing games. I just can't do it. I mean, I've tried it every once in a while, but it's just like, I don't really like this, So eventually, yeah, maybe he might have a point at first, but it's really ultimately up to that person as far as that point. And I think these people are I mean, it just seems like they're growing more popular and popular. I think I don't think they're at that peak yet. Because if you're at the peak, then I mean, there's only one way to go. Once you hit that peak, you're going to go straight down. But it doesn't seem like this is going to go away or falter all that much. At least not in the in the near future, at least as far as from what I think.
I I've oscillated back and forth on that argument, Gasicles, in terms of if they've kind of lost their influence. And I think in some ways we've seen the peak of that with the discussions earlier in the decade about disclosing of sponsorships and paid content creation and things like that. I think some of that has settled down to the degree that it may not necessarily matter to the viewers as much anymore. In part that the reason that somebody is coming is back to Swiss's point in terms of it being a mature industry. That people are going for personalities, for entertainment, not necessarily for game information. That they're coming to watch it as entertainment rather than as trailers to a game. And so in that case, I think it does support your thesis of that this is the influencing aspect of influencers is not the same. That said, thinking about watching my kids and their friends as they're over and watching YouTube and other people, I think that there is still the strong capacity in people younger than us that this is still a vibrant industry in terms of being able to introduce viewers to new content, whether or not they stick with it, or I think I would say that for many creators, or as an industry, content creation as an industry, they may be less worried about if they move people into those games as they are about keeping people on their channel. And so I think the market for how influencers have been perceived has shifted from as they transitioned out of traditional games media in that kind of preview coverage, and influencers suddenly became this previewer reviewer piece. Now they are the reality TV aspect of games.
Right, with the end result being that gamers are less informed as they continue to watch. The more hours of Twitch that they consume, the less informed the gaming customer base seems to be. But that's just my harumph, get off my lawn piece for tonight. Part 3 here, the rise of secret and shadowy players in the games market, as EBQ alluded to. One of the trends that I entered into the docket that I felt was significant for this decade is how there and the poster child for this who actually went away during this decade, used to be a company called Sierra or Vivendi Universal. So Vivendi Universal used to own Sierra Games and a bunch of other small publishers. They were the shadow company that was kind of behind. They're a French company that was kind of behind games like King's Quest and Space Quest. And nobody ever heard of them. The only publisher you ever really knew about was Sierra. But slowly and quietly, Vivendi Universal over time acquired a bunch of companies and actually was the principal stakeholder, probably, or at least one of the very large stakeholders when Activision Blizzard combined. And then eventually, I believe Activision bought Vivendi Universal out of their share of the Activision Blizzard conglomerate. So
wasn't Vivendi also involved with Ubisoft at one point, which eventually got bought out as well?
I think
they were trying to. Yeah, they were trying to take over. I was just Googling that because they were trying to take over Ubisoft, and I think Ubisoft was able to kind of prevent them from doing like a takeover.
Right. So at the beginning of the decade, that Vivendi Universal interaction kind of with the industry was kind of a one-off and a singular monolith. But what we've seen, I feel like what we've seen during this decade is we've seen other players of similar behaviors enter the market, as well as just players that are unintuitively large and hold vast influence and sway, but are rarely spoken about. And the two that I specifically pointed out in my entry were Tencent. I think now, because of the Blitzchung thing, people are now more aware of Tencent. Again, I talk about the unfortune of the gaming community and consumer base being vastly uninformed. Tencent's been around for a long time. They acquired a lot of those companies. Like, I'm glad people found out about it last year, but by the time people were finding out about it, Tencent now obviously owns large percentages in some very big players such as Epic. They entirely own Riot Games. I think they're a 100% owner of Riot Games. They have a large foothold in, I forget what they're called, but the people who do PUBG. And they continuously maneuver to acquire other bits and pieces of other companies. I personally think that it's complete. Yeah, go ahead, DBQ.
No, I was just going to say, and Tencent have shares in Ubisoft. They are a distributor for Activision Blizzard, right? I mean, we're talking not only kind of smaller or more recent pieces, but also kind of established game companies as well.
Right. So if you actually go and actually look up the largest earning players in the games industry per year, Tencent is right at the top. But and we talked about this, I think in an episode earlier this year, we talked about publishers, or maybe it was a bit piece that we were briefly discussed, this topic of publishers who have influence. Tencent, at least they don't wield it, as far as I can tell, doesn't hold a lot of influence creatively or from a business model perspective over the industry, right? Most of that you hear coming from EA, Ubisoft, right? The traditional publishers that we talk about during the E3 conference. But the reality is, just in terms of stake and territory owned, Tencent is absolutely one of the biggest players in the market. The other one that I felt was incredibly interesting is Wargaming, sometimes referred to as Wargaming.net or the Wargaming Company. These are the guys who do World of Tanks, World of Warships, World of whatever the flavor of Kool-Aid is of the month. They seem to be able to sell millions and millions and millions of dollars of subscriptions for whatever game they're hawking. In September 2018, they opened a studio in UK, and they're at about 20 studios now. I mean, there are first-party game console manufacturers who don't own 20 studios. And Bloomberg back in early 2016 valued them at about $1.5 billion. They are probably close to a $2 billion company right now, and they almost exclusively do free-to-play games with microtransactions as the core business model, and built off of nothing but that. They have become a pretty significant player in the industry. And if you go to the Wikipedia and look at some of their offices put many, many modern tech companies to shame. Like, I can't imagine. I would love to see their not SEC, but their like accounting spreadsheets or their accounting sheets for reporting earnings to see how much they pay for real estate. And on that topic, another interesting note, not a publicly traded company. They were listed on the Cyprus Stock Exchange up until I think about 2013, and then they just got tired of playing and just stopped sending in reports, and so they were eventually delisted. And there's you can go through and find interviews with their CEO who basically said, yeah, it gives us the freedom to do basically whatever we want to do, and we don't, we're not accountable to shareholders, and we don't have to follow, any accounting commission rules. So pretty impressive. And there are other companies probably like this behind the scenes. We often talk about the parts of EA and Ubisoft and Activision, who are their big mobile gaming divisions, who actually rake in a very large percentage of those companies' quarterly revenue. But you rarely hear about the mobile game company themselves unless you're specifically tracking mobile gaming. So it's just a very interesting kind of skew in how the industry is formulated, that it's become a little more, in some ways, a little more atomic, and in some ways, a little less.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And actually, we're going to mix up the order here because you started us down this economic path. And because this is E2KG, we've got to keep talking business and dollars. So let's stay here. We're going to jump down into my topic here about changing economic models, right? Gascles, you already started talking about free to play, right? That we saw that as a big rise over the course of the last decade in terms of not only mobile, but also PC and now onto consoles as well. On the same time that you've got those kind of big shadowy publishers who own stakes in some of the established and startup areas, we also this last decade had the rise of Kickstarter and more indie funded, whether it's Fig or Kickstarter or a variety of other services that kind of crowdfunding of game development, or at least the attempt to crowdfund game development, as many Kickstarters realize that their Kickstarters is not actually enough money to pay a studio to finish a game, but it ends up being enough to demonstrate some interest in a market for that type of game. So the free-to-play models, the big shadowy developers, Kickstarter, but then you already started talking about kind of with those free-to-play models, the microtransactions. And so Swiss, you've got that topic as well related to the rise of mobile and microtransactions.
Right. That was kind of one of the big things. Back in the day, the concept of you'd buy little bits and pieces of digital content for your game, it wasn't a thing. And then 2007, the original iPhone was released, and as the smartphone started to penetrate the market, and then we got tablets, there were games for them. And Candy Crush Saga, I think, was released in 2012, right? You had some other major players, and it opened a whole new market for game developers to tap into, because as we talked about earlier, with the maturation of the industry, it's no longer just block of gamers, right? You got casual gamers that only do mobile. You have your hardcore gamers, and within the hardcore community, you have people that like RPGs and action games and MMORPGs. So there's a lot there, but with the mobile development specifically, I think developers started to see, oh, wow, we can get it in a lot of people's hands, and if we just nickel and dime them, we can make a lot more money with a lot cheaper development of a game. Those aren't robust AAA titles there. And so I think that became very appealing early in the decade. And then as we move later into the decade, we started to see that penetrate into AAA titles. And I would say the peak of that would probably be the EA Battlefront 2 debacle. I think that's probably the moment, I think, when the torches and pitchforks were at their most aggressive. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that game almost made my most influential list in terms of because of that exact reason.
Right. And since then, I think some of those big developers have pulled back. but we still see that monetization strategy in there. I mean, there's a lot of games where you can buy digital content. You know, whether it's aesthetic, I think it's starting to go away for it to be like affecting the play, but that's just that's just one piece of it. So we got it in mobile. It opened up a new, an entirely new market, and then those strategies started to penetrate, to cross over. But beyond just the microtransactions, this is where I have another kind of similar, I think, topic. But Prime mentioned post-launch content, and I think that also kind of plays into the same idea.
Yeah. So, I mean, you kind of mentioned DLC and stuff already like that, but I mean, you have other kinds of content now that, I mean, not just content where it's kind of like expansion packs, kind of back like in the PC days. Now they kind of do that in console games now, but you have times where they'll like change a whole game. I remember, I think it was Fallout 3, I believe, that it kind of ended after you finished the game, and
Yep,
then
and then you got the Broken Steel DLC.
yeah, so people are kind of pissed off, like, "Hey, I still want to, do stuff. I have all this, armor, and I got all these power ups and stuff. I can't do anything. I'd have to like start over, or start a new save, go back to an old save, and not do like the end mission. But then, yeah, they did that, and then you're able to continue, into the game. And Mass Effect 3, where they kind of changed or added to the ending. I think they totally changed it, didn't they? Or they just added to it, I guess.
They more
Sort
added
of.
to it, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, you get a lot of that stuff now, where you can just almost change wholly. I mean, even like if you look at Ubisoft lately, I mean, they're just constantly adding and changing onto games and kind of bringing new life into some of their games that might not be doing so well, like Rainbow Six Siege, which I mean, it was fine. It kind of had a lukewarm, beginning, but now it's like this powerhouse game that people are playing all the time. So I think that's definitely not only changing how games can be made better, but possibly also how they're made. And it's like, okay, we got, and I don't want to say this happens all the time, but we have like 99.99% of this game done. Let's kind of throw it out there, and we can fix it later on. I hate to say that, but it does seem to happen sometimes. I don't think any publisher has ever actually admitted that outright. I don't think, but they've kind of changed how publishers were at least starting to make games.
Well, I think Bethesda basically admitted it out loud. I mean,
76.
I mean, I forget.
Bethesda put it on paper and sent a letter out to people who bought Fallout 76.
Right, and in the post follow-up interview, a year later or whatever, the guy admitted, he was like, we knew the game wasn't baked like at launch, and we knew that it was going to take time to get it to where it needed to be. So yeah.
Yep.
So that idea of kind of post-launch content, not only from the DLC in terms of funding and continuing revenue streams, but also the ability through DLC to keep a game alive, to reinvigorate it. Whether as you were talking about, like Ubisoft with For Honor, or the continued additions within Rainbow Six Siege. That all ties into another topic that both you, Prime, and Agasicles have in terms of games as services, live service games, cloud gaming initiatives. All of those things tie directly into that. That now, as games are being pushed out or have the ability to be updated on the fly, that changes some of the models in terms of how games not only are released but maintained, and now, over the last couple of years and moving forward, also as how they're distributed and consumed as well. So, Agasicles, you want to talk a little bit about where you see that trajectory of cloud gaming over the last decade?
Oh yeah, I mean, from the release of OnLive, June 17th, roughly in 2010, and all of us gamers were skeptical when that thing launched. None of us believed that was ever going to work. And here we are at the beginning of the next decade, and Phil Spencer has basically said that is the gaming market now. We're not competing about consoles. The console wars are over. Generation 9 will not be a console war. Microsoft is waging a services war, with Spencer declaring that his main competitors are Amazon and Google. Completely different competitive skew. So yeah, it's a pretty amazing thing. I mean, we talk about the march of technology and how microwaves are different now, and I can't remember. I can remember using a popcorn maker growing up. I don't know that I could find a popcorn maker to order on Amazon right now. In an amazingly short track amount of time from 2010 to the end of the decade, cloud gaming looks to be where it's at, and it's arguably. I hate to talk about I hate to talk about. I won't talk about the end of consoles, but I mean, it is possible that the thing that's going to be more interesting and more important to keep an eye on and is going to change and have a larger impact on gamers on a day-to-day basis is going to be the emergence of capabilities and the differentiation in capabilities across cloud gaming services. You're gonna continue to play on an Xbox or a PlayStation or a Nintendo Switch, but at the end of the day, what's going to make a difference to people's bottom lines is, but you're going to be playing that thing, and it's going to be essentially mounted on the Azure fabric, right, or Google Cloud Compute fabric, and that's what's going to wind up becoming important, because that's going to determine how you connect to other gamers, how you get from gamers all the way from the top of the hardware, Animal Kingdom, right, with an Xbox Series X, interconnecting all the way with somebody down playing on an Android phone in the same ecosystem. So it's a pretty amazing trend.
I agree. I had a very similar point. I mean, we're already there as far as games running off of AWS or Azure, or you know what I mean? Like, companies are already using those platforms, okay? It's just a matter of, will we as consumers be now tapping into those platforms to for rendering the game locally? In other words, the servers are already running everything in the background for Destiny and WoW and what have you. That's all there. You're connecting to those fabrics. One of the big things for me was so we have the introduction of Stadia, which is taking that technology and trying to apply it to at the consumer level, where I don't have like you were saying, Agascles, a big console like a premium Xbox or whatever. I have my tablet or whatever. So that I agree that trend was pretty massive this decade. I mean, when you look back, E3 2013 was when Microsoft started to try to introduce the public, I guess almost, or console gaming public to this idea. And they had the whole thing where you would still buy a disc, but once you've used that disc, that was it. It was installed, and there was going to be no resale market or anything for the discs. And it was the first step towards getting rid of discs entirely. And everybody rioted, and it almost, it allowed PS4 to, Sony to win that generation effectively, right? They immediately came out and said, "Oh, wait, we're not going to get rid of your discs," and that was it. People had made up their minds. Sony had won. Microsoft, to their credit, didn't. I mean, they backtracked with the Xbox One, but they didn't abandon the idea. And we're seeing now that after the decade has gone by, even just the 7 years, it doesn't seem stupid anymore. I don't know if it seemed stupid then, but people are ready for it now. And so we're moving on beyond that. We're seeing GameStop is hemorrhaging money. I don't know how much longer it's going to survive. We got Stadia. It's not there yet, but it will be. And then we have things like Game Pass, and all these services are really driving home the fact that we're in a digital gaming age, and it's all going to be built on the cloud. But the idea that a future without consoles, I don't. It's kind of weird to imagine, but I don't think if we're still doing E2KG in the year 2030, that it's going to be surprising when none of us have an Xbox 2 or whatever they want to call it at the time.
Well, and I'll wait in on that just because I was giving that some thought on my way home. I don't believe we're ever going to get to that point. I think that there will always be consoles, but what I think is that we're going to stop talking so much about being on Xbox, being on PlayStation, because again, those things are just going to be components of a larger fabric. And so what we're going to be talking about, I think, is we're going to be talking about playing on the Xbox service. And so DBQ might be on a PC, I might be on an Xbox One, Prime might be on travel and playing on his Android phone, and Swiss, who knows, you might be accessing the Xbox service via your Switch Pro 2. You know, but that hardware, I mean, and it kind of happens now, right? Like, I join in and play with friends, you know, and we're on different platforms. Sometimes there needs to be a conversation about, like, hey, everybody needs to get on Discord, which is easier for me because I'm on PC, right? So that's a thing that needs to be solved. But I think, you know, I'm sorry, so I'm going to wax philosophic here, but I'll try and make it very quick. The overall job of software and technology companies is to drive everything that they do as a specialty to become a commodity. Because once you then make that thing common and everybody can do it, you can then leapfrog and move on to the next thing. And what Microsoft, in my opinion, you know, part of their strategy has been to continue to push hard. The Xbox One is a great piece of hardware, right? The Xbox has always been a great piece of hardware, but what they have slowly trudged to do is to build up the service side of the offensive, right, to eventually drive to a point where the console is going to become a commodity. And while you may be proud of it and slave to it, it's not really going to be the thing that's important. But we're still all going to participate in the same ecosystem as gamers.
And I think this is such a valuable discussion because it is relevant this year, within the last 2 years, as Game Pass and Stadia and those cloud-based things begin to see some more traction. I think, Swiss, your example of, you know, the Xbox talking about diskless and things like Titanfall that was going to be rendering, you know, in the cloud so that it was doing some of the computer processing, or what was that? It was Crackdown, right? That
Crackdown
was
3.
Destruction. Yeah, Crackdown 3. Right, and then Gascles, your example of OnLive taking us all the way back to the beginning of the decade, that this is not a new, it's just a concept that is finally maturing or is stable enough to be accessible and successful. Right, early in this decade, we also had Sony purchased Gaikai, right? Like, this is what the infrastructure of PlayStation Now is based on as well. Are we going to say this?
I was going to say, if you think about it, in 2013, who had like good broadband? I mean, it scared people. I mean, I don't yet now, but it's coming. But back in 2013, like, the concept of, like, man, I got to download all that data if I want to install a game. I think just the internet infrastructure just being, like, growing has been a tremendous help.
So to dovetail into this, you know, the fact that games can be streaming and that services and platforms can be streaming also has enabled game services to feel more accessible and valuable, or at least a value as a commodity. And Prime and Swiss, you both have games as service on here as well in terms of another trend.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of pretty much talked about the evolution of the gaming services, where it was going, as far as the cloud and stuff like that. But yeah, and you know, when I was talking about game services, I was talking about, you know, like Xbox Live and you know, PSN and stuff like that. Obviously, Xbox Live came out in 2002, I believe, on the original Xbox, but it really didn't blow up until kind of the within like the 360s generation, you know, PS3, kind of the tail end of that. We started getting a lot more DLC coming out for a lot more games, you know, and then coming up to this generation now, Xbox One and PS4, obviously, we're getting, you know, like I said before, you know, this kind of ties into what I was saying before. We get a, you know, whole almost a whole game, you know, in a DLC now, we like an expansion pack coming out, and you know, these services now are like, you know, like a Gascles was talking about, you know, they're kind of morphing into the cloud based, you know, like, you know, we're getting XCloud and Stadia and all these other services. What was the newest one that just came out? I can't remember now. It was the PC one.
Well, GeForce Now just went out of beta and is
Beta,
now,
right?
I think, technically GeForce On.
I believe so. Yeah.
But yes, it is accessible to everyone. You used to have to go into a waiting list queue to get access to it, but now it's open and available to everyone.
Yeah, so you got these cloud services, and then you got stuff like I think you mentioned DB real quickly. Game Pass, you got EA Access, you got these kind of other services that are starting to spin out of that or spin into it. We'll see. I believe Ubisoft's service is supposed to latch on to Stadia at some point. So you get all these services are starting to pop up um, it's these other services, they're pretty good deal. I mean, you get Game Pass for I forget how much it is, like $15 a month or something like that. And you get a whole hundreds of games that you can pick from, indie games, triple title game, triple A games, and just this whole slew of games. So I mean, it's it's a good deal for what they're bringing out, as at least for right now. I mean, who knows what's going to spin into coming into the future and going into the cloud.
So as we wrap up this segment, we've got one more point to make here, but I want to circle us back around before we get to that, because I think actually all of our discussion here over the last 45 minutes, they all just kind of blend together, or that they help kind of enforce each of those other trends to exist and to thrive. That the ability of streamers and influencers and kind of the segmentation or the visible segmentation of the market, the ability to consume and to engage with that media makes smaller pockets more accessible. The free to play markets, the back end publishers in terms of development and financial support, the microtransactions all make a lot of smaller pieces, Kickstarters, all of that makes some of those pieces more viable. And as that model has shifted into microtransactions themselves have gone from the uproar over horse armor and into something that is just accepted and part of the financial structure. And now as people are more accustomed to continuing to pay for things, that makes on-live services, it makes subscription services all the more palatable. And because of the fact that we have streaming services, we get to the point that Agasicles was making, that the lines between, and this is the decade when the lines between console generations started to blur, started to fall apart, and that's kind of the last point here, is that what is a console generation at this point? And Agasicles, that was kind of your final piece there, right? Is that idea of console generations and the definition of them starting to change and have less meaning as well.
Yeah, I mean it was roughly a 7-year, up until console generation 7. Most console generations 3 through 6 were typically 4 years, sometimes 5. But console generation 7, the Xbox 360, the PlayStation 3 generation, that went to 7 years, and this is the second time now. So I refer to it as it kind of cemented that as a norm, right? Because when the 360 and the PS3 went by, we that was just an anomaly. Now it seems like it's going to potentially become the norm, and yeah, I think now, I mean, again, Spencer has said it. It's going to be interesting to watch the Xbox transition, because I don't think it's going to. Their objective is that it's not going to be a transition. To them, the Series X is no different than me having a 1070 GTX in a box and going out and buying an RTX 2070 and throwing it in. There should be no interruption in service. There should be not that big of a delta. And the only difference, I'm still going to... It used to be, when we transitioned consoles before, it used to be you would get separated from your friends, right? Because if your friends were still on last gen, you couldn't play together, right? And so there was this trickle transition period as people onboarded in the next generation. Some people got left behind, right? You would lose contact with friends. We're not going to see that this time, at least on Xbox. And it's going to be interesting if that becomes a severe tale, right? Because if PlayStation's not the same, and historically they have not been, right, that's going to become a topic of conversation. If all the Xboxers are still playing together, but the PlayStation people are separated, that could become a thing where their numbers work against them. So it'll be interesting to watch.
It will be, and that's a good a good way to wrap up our last decade, and as we look forward to this next decade as well. So as we move into the next segment is influential games, influential games of the last decade. We each have chosen 2 games, and what I want to do is just round robin it for each of us. We're going to go through this list. I want to give each of you guys a chance to give a quick elevator pitch on why you think that this game is influential. So I'm going to start with you, Swiss. Give me one of your games and why you think it's influential.
Just one right now.
Just one right now.
All right, I chose Minecraft because it came out early in the decade, and it's basically a phenomenon. I think it's like one. I mean, Fortnite's kind of getting up there, but I don't even think it's in the same league as Minecraft. I mean, my kids love Minecraft. Like that's the thing. That's the game, and you know, it kind of ties into so much that we've talked about tonight. Monetization strategy. You have like a lot of microtransactions. We have games as a service. I mean, it's always being kind of evolved and updated, and they keep adding new little bits and pieces to the game. And then it's cross-platform. It doesn't care what it's running on. It's owned by Microsoft, but it's on everything. So it's just the way that it's pierced the collective consciousness of the wider community. So that's one of my most influential games of the decade.
I would say that makes a strong claim for being the most influential game of the decade, given the fact that it has sustained itself over the course of the decade. I'm going to go to you, Prime, next, because you've got a game that Swiss already kind of alluded to, but I also think it's a game that is not possible without the success of Minecraft.
I'm assuming you're talking about Fortnite.
I am talking about Fortnite.
I was gonna go somewhere else, but that's all right. I'll go with Fortnite now. Yeah, I mean, this game, yeah, probably not as big. It hasn't had the legs, obviously, because Minecraft's been out a lot longer. But I think it's getting there. A lot of people thought, this came out. The Save the World part came out in July of 2017.
Yep.
Yeah, which was kind of this like. Almost like a horde mode, I suppose. It's just like these zombies coming at you, and you got to build up, and
it's a survival game.
Yeah, survival game. And that did okay. We found it was announced. Man, I don't even remember. It was a while ago that it was announced before that 2017 date that it came out, and it did okay. And then they brought out the battle royal mode of it, and obviously that has blown up since then. And I think kind of Save the World is in the back burner right now. But every once in a while, I see them. I think they're trying to bring that to the forefront now because I see a lot on Twitter where they're kind of pushing that and other media. But obviously, the battle royal has just blown up. It's kind of like the WWE of games because it's kind of this entertainment like thing that happens now because you got all these big events that happen, in between seasons and even a little bit within the seasons itself. But then you have all these crossovers. You got Marvel, DC, you got Star Wars that have crossed over with it. And then you have like brands. You got like sneakers that they've done. They got basketball. You got football. They do things, for the Super Bowl and World Series and stuff like that. So there's always something going on in this game. And you got obviously this kind of ties back into the streamers. You have streamers like Ninja who have blown up in the game, and other people who are always playing this game, and people are watching them and following them to see what's going on next in this game. When you can just Google Fortnite and see what's going to happen. But they want to watch their personality out there and play this game and give them the information that they're waiting for. But it's just like something that I got drawn into, and I wasn't big into it at first. And this is kind of obviously a personal tale. I just couldn't get into the gameplay just because I was coming from like Battlefield and Call of Duty, and then this was a completely different type of game that a different mindset you have to put yourself in when you're playing this game. But I just think it's just, I mean, you just see it everywhere. You hear it all the time. It's books and you got machinima out there, which is something I forgot to mention. Kind of that the streamers and influencers kind of spun out of was kind of the machinima stuff back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And you got clothes, you got toys. I mean, there's like toys on the shelf. Sometimes I'll see it in there like, oh, maybe Fortnite is starting to kind of wind down because kind of the toy section's just kind of there. But then I go in the the next week and it's just like picked over and there's barely anything there. So obviously it's it's still going strong.
So we've got 2 building games, 2 live games that have been updated and have crossed over in a variety of different ways. Gascles, you have 2 games that I'm pretty sure I have not seen a whole lot of toys on the shelf for. So give me one of your games and why you think it is influential of this last decade.
Yeah, so I put in as one of my games the fall 2018 release from Rockstar Games, Red Dead Redemption 2. A game which any listeners of the podcast and my co-hosts know I don't actually maybe arguably particularly care for. But I have to admit, the game, I think, weighs heavily on the industry in terms of just the apogee of theatricality that it brought in its depth of story. In my opinion, its depth of story exceeds, what's been done in the Grand Theft Auto series. Players and gamers who play that game tend to come to care a great deal for that character, and more importantly, the relationships that it has with a lot of the NPCs. It also, and I don't know if this is a great trend, it seemed to also put the stamp of approval on game design based on involving gamers in very mundane tasks. The fact that the game is chock full of that amount of content and gamers seem to like it seems to have convinced game companies that that's okay, which might be unfortunate. But there's no questioning the technical achievement of Red Dead Redemption 2. It's gone on to release on PC last year. Again, it's a technical achievement, very wonky and wobbly out of the gates. But Rockstar seemed to swing back around and address a lot of those performance problems, pretty hastily. And now you have a thriving online community with constant drops of content, much in the same as the GTA model. Again, not performing financially as well, but I don't think it's a game that sold well, was critically acclaimed, and gamers seem to enjoy, and it's rare that you get that trifecta, right? You often get one of the 3 or 2 of those 3, but this one seemed to come all around on all 3 of those topics.
Can I ask you one quick question? I know we're really pressed for time.
Yeah.
But why not GTA 5? Because I feel like if GTA 5 hadn't been a mega smash hit for Rockstar, there would be no Red Dead Redemption 2.
Yeah, for me, in my opinion, and I'm not. This is not an argument to say Red Dead Redemption 2 is more influential than GTA 5. GTA 5. I mean, if we were ranking these, GTA 5 would certainly have an argument. Why did I pick Red Dead Redemption 2 instead of GTA 5? I think GTA 5 in its socio-cultural depictions is off-putting to a lot of people. And so it makes it unapproachable and inaccessible for a large demographic of gamers, I feel like.
Honestly, I haven't played GTA 5. I have no interest in GTA 5, and yet I had an interest in Red Dead Redemption 2. So that's a very astute point, I think.
Right, exactly. And to me, that made it, less influential in terms of game design. I think the financial model of GTA 5 is very influential, but in terms of, types of games that people chase in terms of game design, to me, Red Dead Redemption 2 is a larger achievement that has more weight in the industry. But like I said, that's just me.
Yeah, no, I was thinking of that as well. The difference between Red Dead being influential for artistic design, for game design, versus for the financial model and success that GTA 5 has created, right? Like those are 2 different ways that we could consider influential. I'm going to stick on the financial model piece and say that one of my influential games is Broken Age. So this is right. This is the Kickstarter to launch all Kickstarters. This is influential not necessarily because of the game of it himself, right? This is the studio that gives us. It comes from the lineage of adventure games with Maniac Mansion and Day of the Tentacle, This is Tim Schafer. All of this, but the reason that it's influential is that it opened up a new financial avenue for a lot of smaller companies and individual developers to try to get their games out there and into the public. And so that's why I think Broken Age is one of the influential games of the decade. So sticking on financial success, I'm going to kick it over to Swiss and Prime, who share a game here in their influential games of the decade.
Go ahead, Prime. I'll let you start.
Well, thank you. So I picked Pokemon Go, a mobile game of all things, but this was a game. Once again, I'm going to make a comparison here, like I did with Fortnite. But this was the software version of the Nintendo Wii. So this was a game that when it came out, kind of just exploded. Like, I mean, just unbelievably, I think for everybody out there. But everybody was playing this game. Obviously kids were, because they knew about Pokemon. But they had their moms, had their grandmas. So you had people holding like multiple phones playing this game. I've seen a lot of times I've seen pictures of people with like rigs up with like hundreds of phones or whatever. But it was simple gameplay. Obviously it was a dumbed down version of the original Pokemon game. But I think that it was that aspect that kind of got people into it. Like even my older sister, who she plays games and stuff a little bit more when I was younger than so now. But she got like really into this game and still plays it. We sometimes do the community day, days, games, game days that they do every month. But this was another something else that they're constantly evolving. Like I said, once again, it's pretty simple. When you first join, now it's a little bit more evolved, a little bit more. I don't want to say harder, really. Maybe the kind of entry into it is a little bit harder because there's so much you can do now. But it's still gameplay wise, it's still you just flip your finger up to throw the ball and you try to catch Pokemon. It's pretty simple, and obviously it gets a little bit more intricate, than that. But you can spin it and there's a little circle that shrinks, and you can get more points if you get that when it's smaller or whatever. But I think it was just I don't know. I just remember when it first came out, it was just so huge, and I played Pokemon back in the day. Once again, I'm getting a little personal here, off and on. But when this came out, once again, it was just because simple gameplay. I jumped into it, I was playing it, and this actually got me back into the mainline games where I started playing, Black and White. I didn't play Ultra Black and White, but I played that one, and I'm playing Sword and Shield now. I picked up Let's Go last year, so it could be like a jumping on point too for a lot of people now that they get a little taste of it, and they'll get back into for the first time a regular Pokemon game. Swiss, I don't know.
Basically,
what your thoughts were.
Yeah, my thoughts went along a similar line. I haven't really played it, to be honest with you, but I know that it was big. I knew I wanted to find a game for my second choice that kind of was from the mobile realm, because I just feel like that was such a big deal in the decade. And then it was a huge game. It was mobile. It's mobile, and it's made a lot of money. And the other thing is it's like a big, well-known IP. I think that's helped a lot. Pokemon has been a thing for a long time. But like Prime said, when I'm in the lobby at in a middle school or whatever, and the secretary who knows that like I'm a IT nerd guy was like, "Have you played Pokemon Go yet?" and is like excited about it. Like she's 60 years old and is wanting to play Pokemon Go and talk about it. Like it's approached a level of cultural zeitgeist that few games have achieved. So I would say that is makes it fairly influential.
So I'm going to skip the rotation here, and I'm going to jump in because my game is on the opposite end of the spectrum. Pokemon Go, I think, is incredibly accessible, and it engaged new communities or lapsed communities in games. Another game that I think is hugely influential over this past decade is Dark Souls. Is the soulsification of other genres and games. That is those battle mechanics or the counting frames, which brings us back even further into things like Monster Hunter. But the fact that Dark Souls leaned into this game is difficult, this game is hard, you're going to need to learn it, and gamers leaned into that as well. So at the same time that in the early 2010s, as you know, you have kind of the action movie, carry me through the roller coaster of Call of Duty as top sellers. You get Dark Souls thrown in there into kind of a more kind of not necessarily masochistic game design, but something that rewards people for their time and their investment. And that as things became more casual and consumable in terms of mass market game design, Dark Souls showed that, I was first thinking about like roguelikes, but roguelikes have been around for a long time. But Dark Souls really starts to show that some of those more difficult game design decisions or implementations can be financially successful and critically successful and find their own communities as well. So that's why I think the genre of Souls-like becomes an influential piece of this last decade. Agathocles, wrap us up here in terms of influential games. There are so many that we could choose from, but why did you choose this one?
Yeah, so I chose the 2016 release of Doom, and it's hard for me to put my fingers on how to articulate exactly why I feel like this game is influential. It's kind of a slow burn aggregation of everybody's kind of general feeling about the game. You listen to other gaming podcasts, and I'm hard pressed to think of any like. And again, I often poo-poo on gaming journalists, but I'm hard pressed to think of any time that I've listened to anyone who doesn't appreciate what Doom was. I think it was maybe arguably the first or the precursor to the notion of shadow drop games, just in as much as it wasn't announced way ahead of its release, and how good it was really, I think, shocked everyone. Everybody expected just another rehash, meat grind rendition of the Doom model, and this somehow transcended it. And Swiss, I actually think maybe there's a little bit of personal experience tether to this too. I often tell the story, and Swiss and I worked together of when Swiss and I were working on a project and we had kind of locked ourselves into trying to solve this one problem by iterating on the design of the original design team. And finally one night, very late on a weekend, we were all standing around in a common workspace, and I asked the question, how would we approach this if forget about the old design team, how would we approach this if we did this from the ground up? And we had an amazingly collaborative conversation about how we would have just restructured this thing. And I said, let's do that. Like, forget trying to fix what they did. Let's do original content. And so Doom 2016 was a lift of the Doom franchise with a new development team from the legacy team that had created everything and worked on everything up through Doom 3. It had to be a very risk-prone and very scary thing to take on this beloved franchise and try and execute upon it, while inherently making the risky decision to change, the behavioral model of what that game used to be. And so I imagine that it had to be fraught with risk and fear, but also a willingness to take on that challenge. So. And its popularity has perpetuated into what I think is a good groundswell movement for Doom Eternal, despite its delay. Everything I've heard about Doom Eternal from people who have previewed it is positive. It's also interesting that it almost deliberately, Doom and Bethesda almost deliberately chose to not address what that game was, this 2016 release was, in terms of the Doom continuity. Like, there's no addressal of where the game falls in the timeline, or whether that's the same person from the original Doom games, or the lore. It's just, it's a Doom game. You're on Mars, right? Go to it. And then the port onto the Switch, which, underperforms the original Doom, but it was the first, what I would say, it was the first really graphically challenging game, ported to the Switch, and was the proof of concept that, hey, we can take a current gen game that we deployed on PlayStation and Xbox and also get it to run on Switch. So to me, and again, I think that's a thing that people have chased. It's a thing that people drew encouragement from. It's why you get The Witcher on Switch, right, and other games that we've seen on Switch as well.
Great, good. Stay on the mic, I guess, please, and let's move to the final round here, which is your most influential, your most meaningful, your most enjoyable game experience over the last decade.
Yeah, well, let's go back to the beginning of the decade again, in holiday season of 2010 on the PlayStation 3, a point at which I was sans Xbox due to my 5th Red Ring of Death. I chose Need for Speed Hot Pursuit because the game, to me, has such it has such a context of historical significance in gaming, but also for that franchise specifically. Need for Speed, obviously, in my opinion, one of the most influential racing franchises in games. I've played almost every iteration up until this point. One of the reasons I picked this game is, to me, this is the last great iteration of Need for Speed in our lifetime, right? Rivals was I liked Rivals. It wasn't as big and influential and as big a hit as this game was. I liked elements of Most Wanted, but for me, Most Wanted skewed way too much towards the Burnout design end of the spectrum. This is the first game that was done by Criterion, and really it was a mixture of the Criterion and I think some members of the Black Box team, but also heavy collaboration from DICE. And so there were seeded elements of the Frostbite engine used to pull this game together. Not entirely built on Frostbite, but it's also the thing that sets up that relationship and is why Criterion is over now doing the spaceship battles for Battlefront. So deployed on all platforms. Hours and hours and hours. Again, this is another point where my gaming life intersects with Swiss. Hours and hours and hours of Swiss, myself, and another friend of ours waking up in the early hours of Saturday mornings before our children were awake, and playing this game in multiplayer. So to me, this was my most important or enjoyed game of the decade.
Nice.
When I saw that in the agenda, I got all warm and fuzzy inside because I knew.
Well, that's the beautiful part about this topic, right? Is that this gives us a chance to kind of reflect on our experiences as well. So let's stick in the early part of the decade, and Prime, let's come back to a game that we've already talked about tonight, that you've talked about, but why is it your most enjoyed game of the decade?
Yeah, and I think I've mentioned this before. This is Minecraft we're talking about here. Kind of a cheat maybe, because I think it was the version 1.0 release was 2011. It actually came out, I think, 2009 when it was kind of beta. And
Alpha was in 2009, but the actual kind of wide release was 2010. Yep.
Yeah. So, like I said, like I mentioned before, this is kind of just comfort food for me. This is, I kind of go on and off of this game like since I've been playing it, and I actually don't think I didn't. This obviously came out first on PC. It's on pretty much everything now, but I didn't start actually playing. I tried it on PC and I was like, I didn't really like it, and I didn't really start really enjoying it until I got on the 360, Xbox 360, and I've pretty much bought it on everything now. I have it on phones, I have it on my Switch, I had it on the Wii U. I've had it on everything, pretty much everything except for the 3DS. I never bought that version, just because I was kind of going off of that at that point, that system. But you can pretty much just do whatever you want on this game. You can go exploring if you want. You can kill things if you want. You can build, obviously. So that's one of the main reasons you play Minecraft. And then, but once I had my son, and he was old enough to play games. This was one of the first games we actually started playing with, together. He started playing first on the iPad, and then it kind of went over to the consoles once he got a little older. Never really liked the PC version. He plays it every once in a while, but he likes the controller or just the touch screen controls. So it was just kind of nice that we were able to, um, get together and play this game. And kind of like how Swiss had mentioned, it's big in his family, and this was kind of, I guess you want to say, the gateway into gaming for us, for me and my son. This is something we were able to enjoy, and nothing too complicated. You don't have to use. I mean, you can use every button, on the controller for this game, but you don't really have to. You can just do whatever you want. So that was my pick for the decade.
Nice. And I love the family connection, right? Grown-ups who game, you've got families. That's a good way to think about that. Swiss, we're moving to the other end of the decade here. You've got a more recent game that you put as your most enjoyed.
I picked Horizon Zero Dawn, and I had a couple of other games that were very close, but I gave the edge to Horizon Zero Dawn because it's one of the games I like. I like to play a game and complete it. It's really kind of chafes at me if I don't finish games. This was a game that I wanted to see every aspect of the story. I enjoyed the story. I enjoyed the sci-fi setting. I enjoyed the gameplay, the strategy involved in taking down some of the giant like robot dinosaurs, and going from early in the game where it was some were basically impossible for me to even conceive of taking down, to like building up my skills and being able. And it wasn't just now I have 100 attack versus 50 attack. It's like I had better tools and I was smarter about using them. I like that arc, collecting everything. So I really played this game to the max it could be played. I need to get the DLC, but so that gave it that put it up there. But I think put it over the edge was this whole idea of the open world title that I think has become very prevalent in the latter half of the decade, now that the technology has is strong enough to facilitate those types of games. So we see a lot from like Ubisoft, and we see a lot of franchises even moving that way. One of the other games that would have been close for me was probably the new God of War, which surprised me in how much that I liked it and enjoyed it. But I gave the tip to Horizon Zero Dawn. God of War, I really love we talk about the family aspect with playing games. I just appreciated the father-son aspect within that game's story, so that was up there for me. So yeah, the last game I was considering was Portal 2, just because of the creativity. But the fact that Horizon Zero Dawn, I enjoyed it so much. I enjoyed the story, and it represents like a very high point, I think, in this open world design. Made it my game of the decade.
Nice. Gentlemen, this has been such a great discussion. I have really appreciated, and I hope you have as well. I mean, I think that we have talked about so many topics over the last years together, and the fact that we can kind of boil these and distill these down and find some themes here that allow us to weave through both industry trends, but also game development and design choices, and our own personal family stories around them as well is why I think we do this, right? It gives us the opportunity to look at both the micro and the macro aspects of this hobby, of this industry, and I am so thankful to be able to have these conversations with you guys. And that is my way of saying my most enjoyed game of the decade is my sentimental pick. It is a game that I have talked about more on this podcast. It's a franchise that I have discussed and engaged in more over the last 5 years. It's the franchise that got me to move from last generation to this generation. It's Destiny, and it's the game that got me into a variety of gaming communities, of raiding late at night with online acquaintances, with meetups on websites, with finding forums, and which is how I got podcasting with you guys. And it's been 5 years that we've been podcasting together in some form or another. 5 years straight that we've been podcasting together in one form or another. Back to the launch of Band of Gamers back in January of 2015. So Destiny made that possible for me, and so for that reason alone, it is my most enjoyed gaming experience of last decade. So thank you, E2KG, and thank you guys. With that tearfelt, heartfelt, sentimental journey, gentlemen, we are at the end of our night. Any other final thoughts before we sign off? Thank you all. This has been a great decade in review. It's been a great past year together, and we were ready launched into a whole lot going on in the year of 2020, and there's so much more to come here on the E2KG network. So please stick around, engage with us on social media, and we will always be glad to continue to bring you our ideas, our topics, our perspectives as grown-ups who game, that we know that there's a balance, and hopefully you can join us as we find that balance of life, of family, of games. Good night.